Well, I think maybe only the grandparents showed up this morning. I actually want to make it relevant to everybody, in the sense that those of you who are younger with children are having to deal with your parents, your in-laws who are grandparents, and a lot of that is included in what I'm going to talk about. A couple of things before I get going on this. One is that for the next contest for a book, if you're interested, that I want you to, afterwards you can come up and tell me what you think Caroline's and my combined ages were on the day we were married. So if we were both 60, that would be 120. It's probably not the right answer. I also wanted to explain that, like even on this topic of grandparenting, I never thought I would be a writer, and it was 12, 13 years ago when I was originally asked to start doing some writing. And the writing I've done has tended to be where I've done a lot of counseling, and I did not have a book I could hand somebody. For all the books Wayne has written, and a lot of the times Wayne had the book, like I've got a guy right now who's dealing with anxiety and fear, and Wayne's got the book, Courage. But I was running into situations, and actually the first was when the one I'm going to talk about in the last session, and I'm mentioning this also because the guy who's selling books over there has some of these. So there's one that we're going to deal with in the last session that's called When Good Kids Make Bad Choices, that's dealing with rebellion. And how do you deal with rebellious teens? And I had all these cases of families who had teenagers who were turning away from the faith and were getting into trouble. That's our last session. And then another situation came along which kind of relates to the grandparenting topic, which is that I had a lot of cases coming in where now the kids are 25 and they're still living at home. And I've actually talked about this in several countries, and everybody says, yeah, that's happening here too. It's not just an American thing, where they don't grow up. It's kind of like the Peter Pan syndrome or something, where they're still living at home, and you say, get up, get a job, get married, do something, and they stay at home, live off their parents, and are not really making much progress in life. Other conflicts were happening between adult kids and their parents, and that they were marrying someone that the parents did not approve of, and conflict there. So the sufficiency of Scripture is so glorious. And actually I found there's an amazing amount in the Bible written about relationships between parents and their adult kids. And some of that's going to come to the grandparenting talk as well. And so I co-authored this book with Elise Fitzpatrick called You Never Stop Being a Parent. And it addresses the many issues that come up between, as in our case now, our kids are 31, 35, and 37. And so the last 15 years or so has been interesting, more than we would have imagined, addressing, when they get into financial trouble, when they get into legal trouble, when they have problems in their marriages, what are we to do? And I think it's significant that the classic cases of failed parenting in the Bible are not people failing with their 5-year-olds. It's Eli in 1 Samuel 2, I've quoted the verse already, who honored his sons above God when they were adults, married and doing all kinds of evil that only adults can do. So, but again, there wasn't something out there, and that motivated me. The one I talked about yesterday during the breakout session, a little book called Parenting is More Than a Formula. You have already heard about that. I also wanted to make so the guy selling books would be really happy if you emptied his stack of these. and then a lot of this is also available on Kindle. The other thing I'll tell you as a resource, and some of you have discovered it, some haven't, is the website of the Counseling Center, of which I'm the executive director, IBCD, and it's just www.ibcd.org. But on that website, there are literally hundreds of free biblical counseling audios and outlines. And actually, a lot of what I've been talking about here, you'll find on there, not every single thing, but a lot of it. And so that's a resource some people have found. It's all on there free. There's also, if you want to look at me while you're being instructed, you have to pay to see the videos because the videos cost a lot to produce. There are also counseling videos that some of you have used in your training where we do interactive practice counseling with people. So I would commend all of that to you as well. And as we come to this topic of godly grandparenting in an ungodly age, it is another example where the Bible is sufficient. It equips us for every good work, as we read in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And I admit, when I was assigned this topic the first time, I felt ill-equipped, in a sense, that Carolyn and I are new grandparents. If you can show the photo. So I realize there's a risk in that, and that I've already been shown one set of grandkids on a phone, and we're all going to want to get out our pictures of our grandkids, and show each other. But actually, until 2 years ago, we had no grandchildren. And then our youngest son married a lady whose daughter was then 7, now she just turned 9, Alexandra. And so suddenly we had a granddaughter, which is actually another grandparenting topic, is you get a step-grandchild and you love and treat them as you would your own. And then our middle son had Graham over there, who's now just turned a year, so this is a while back. And then our youngest son and his new wife had Baltimore. That's another thing about grandparenting. You'll get any choice in the names of your grandchildren. So I don't know how they came up with that one, but there she is. And that's made a big, okay, you can take down the photo, and everybody else during the break, you can show me your photos, and I'll appreciate yours as well. So it's been interesting for us too, because actually Carol and I were never, there are people in church I call baby snatchers. You know what I mean by that? These are the people that they see a mom or a dad holding a baby, and these are usually middle-aged or older people, say, "Can I hold your baby?" And they snatch the baby and carry the baby around, and we were never that. We like kids, but it's been something really life-changing to have our own and to participate in caring for them. And actually the week before, right before we came here, we were on a family vacation with our middle son and his family. And the main reason we went was to be around Graham, and everything else was superfluous. But anyway, so I'm not a greatly experienced grandparent. Dr. Mack would be a much better person probably to give this talk, but I've been given the job. And actually the way it felt to me originally is there was a conference in Texas, and they wanted someone to speak about this, and they couldn't find anybody. And so I finally agreed to kind of do the research and put together a talk, even though I felt like I was a novice. And as I thought about it, I realized that the best experience I had on the grandparenting front is really not being a grandparent. I'm very new at it, but having a grandfather who had an amazing impact on my life. My dad probably was never a believer. He died several years ago. He was also a man who was very busy. He was also a bit angry and selfish, quite frankly. In many ways, he tried to be a good dad, and I'm thankful to God for some of those good things. But my mother's father, my grandfather, actually, he had had 2 daughters and no sons, and I was the first grandson, and I think he kind of adopted me. And I remember as a young boy that I would get up at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning and pick up the dial telephone and dial his number, and he was happy to talk to me while my parents wanted to sleep till noon. And we just talk and talk and talk. And as I grew a little bit older, he wanted to take me hunting and fishing. And I remember even up until the time of his death, I just knew I could call him any time, and he would talk to me as long as I liked. And he had a lot of wisdom. He was a professing Christian. And actually, when Carol and I got serious, this will be a hint for the quiz later, when we were in college, and we were convinced we were going to marry each other, as when we kind of, just a month or two after we had made that commitment, I took her down to South Texas to meet my grandparents, to stay with them, and they loved Caroline, and that was an affirmation. I remember seeing in their marriage, some of us grow up in homes where we didn't really see a model of how a husband should love his wife and a wife respect her husband. And I was so blessed to see in their marriage how he cared for her, how he went above and beyond his ordinary responsibilities, and how she just revered him. And so, what is good in our marriage, I think probably a lot of it is what we learned from them. Another aspect in terms of how I come to this is now, and it's kind of the other side of the coin, since we moved to Charlotte, we're in a church with a lot of couples in their 30s. And the couples are believers, and their parents often are not believers. A lot of them are kind of first-generation Christians. And do you know the term millennial? The millennials, that generation that millennials have kind of a bad reputation as not growing up and all of that. Well, I call the young adults in our congregation kind of the anti-millennials, where they're that age, but they have, they get out of high school, they get a job, they start a business, they get married, they have kids, and they're living as adults at a really young age, especially for their generation. And I've found, as I've counseled with some of the young adults in our congregation, they're really having trouble with their parents. And they're having trouble with their parents, selfishness. They're having trouble with their parents where they are not respecting the rules and the standards with the grandkids. You let your kids go spend the day with grandma, and grandma is showing videos that you don't want your kids to see, and other such things, not following the rules. And we'll talk more about that later. And so it kind of has helped me to see it from the other side. And again, there are biblical principles for all of this. And so, the question that many of us would have, and I'm going to take it from both sides because we have a mixed group, is what role would God have us to play in the lives of our grandchildren? But then also, if you're the one who has kids and you're dealing with your parents and your in-laws, that what is that relationship to look like between grown children with kids and their parents and grandparenting? And there are various scenarios. There is kind of the ideal, and this is the kind of Facebook grandparenting experience where your kids are believers, they live close to you geographically, they love to have Sunday dinner with you every week, and now and then you offer to babysit the grandkids so they can have date night, and everybody's getting along, and your grandchildren love you and you love them, and it's all perfect, and I'm happy for that if that's your experience. But because we live in a fallen world, and I said godly grandparenting in an ungodly age, some of us have children who are not believers, who don't share our values, and they're not raising their children, our grandchildren, the way that we would want to in the fear of the Lord. And sometimes we come into conflict about what they're doing and what we think they should do. And then some of us have grandchildren as they get older, and some of you have grandchildren who are now becoming adults and they're turning away from the faith. Some of this even relates to the earlier topics that your granddaughter comes out and she's a lesbian, or she's claiming to be a boy in a girl's body, and you're having to cope with that. So, the ideal biblically is that grandchildren are made by God as a blessing and a joy, and the Bible talks about this. A blessing in the Psalm is, may you see your children's children. And I think that was the psalm we read the very first day in Psalm 128. And Psalm 127 and 128 are these pictures of the godly family. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 6 as well. It says, grandchildren are the crown of old men, and the glory of sons is their fathers. In our little church, when it was I'm the backup preacher for the normal preacher because I'm normally out of town or working at the seminary, but when it was my turn, I went to the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth is all about a grandmother in the end, isn't it? Naomi is hopeless, and the book of Ruth ends with Naomi holding a baby who is the hope not only for her family, but the hope of Israel. The grandfather of David, Obed, through Jesse, through David. And of course, many of us have found, and that was the joke we started with, that grandparenting could be fun. One person said, if I knew that having grandchildren would be this great, I would have had them first. There are many ways that grandparents can be a great blessing, and the most important would be spiritual. And in the Old Covenant, especially when the law was given again in the book of Deuteronomy, there are these references. Deuteronomy 4:9, do not forget the things you have seen, but make them known to your sons and to your grandsons. And so there's a role of testimony that a grandfather and a grandmother can have to declare the Word of God, to declare the great works of God, to declare the redemption that God has brought in the Old Covenant. They remembered being delivered out of Egypt and the great things God had done that were so easily forgotten, and all of that points to the redemption we have received in Christ out of the slavery in the Egypt of our sin. Psalm 78 talks about proclaiming God's works even to a generation yet unborn. The psalmist says, one generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty works. I think it's also important that we talked about this yesterday in my breakout session, that as we have the privilege, and some of us have the privilege of instructing our grandchildren. You get to babysit, and the parents are good with this, and you read them Bible stories, and little children love Bible stories. But as we tell those Bible stories, and you think of the famous passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is speaking specifically to fathers, but I think that also speaks to grandsons. That this is the commandment, Deuteronomy 6, the statutes, the judgments that the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, you might do them in the land where you're going to possess it, so that you and your son and your grandson might fear the Lord your God, to keep all of his statutes. And then in verse 4, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons. And so we as grandparents can participate. That passage is significant in many ways. One is, first, it must be on your own heart before you can tell them. But then we have the privilege of reminding our children of the wisdom of God, the law of God, and most of all, when you get to the end of the passage, in verse 20 in Deuteronomy 6, when your son asks you in the time to come, saying, what do the testimonies and statutes and judgments mean which the Lord has commanded you? And you say to your son, we were slaves. And so the culmination of what we're to share with our sons and our grandsons and our granddaughters is redemption. They're remembering the great redemption that God has wrought. And of course, we have a greater redemption, of which theirs was only a type. In 2 Timothy 1:5, you have the reference, I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm sure that it is in you as well. So there you do have a multi-generational blessing. We just share your testimony. Every one of us has a story of how God has saved us. Everyone has a story of how God has worked in our lives, and to share those stories with our grandchildren. I remember my grandfather, he actually knew people who had been involved in the very end of the Indian Wars and problems in Texas and going back into the 19th century. And he told all these amazing stories. How much more for us to tell the stories of God's work in our lives and his faithfulness to us and how he has saved us and cared for us. And of course, the story that's all of our stories in the Scriptures. And you think of the wisdom of Proverbs is written. And again, we as grandfathers and grandmothers can perform the role of a godly father and mother in sharing God's wisdom with our grandchildren and teaching them self-control and with their tongue and godly friendships and purity and sexual wisdom and temptation and all of these things. And we're sowing seed. And one of my privileges as a pastor over many years has been when people come for baptism, they give their testimony. And there have been times when somebody says, I remember my grandmother used to read the Bible. I remember my grandfather was this. And now they're 40 years old. And those beloved grandparents may be gone. But the parents may not have sown much seed, but the grandparents did. And then decades later it bears fruit. And the Word of God does not go forth and return void. And then just living an example. Paul could say in 1 Corinthians 11, follow me as I follow Christ. As I mentioned with my grandparents. And I remember watching when I would go eat supper when I was a boy. I would sometimes go spend time with my grandparents. And I would spend the day with my grandmother. My grandfather was still working at the time. And he would come home and my grandmother would make a nice dinner for us. I remember my grandfather, 6'2", manly man, gets up from the table and starts to wash the dishes by hand. No dishwashers back then. And I remember thinking, this is kind of weird. You know, she's been sitting around all day. And he got up at 5 in the morning and fought traffic back and forth to downtown Washington, D.C. and in his job. And yet he's up there washing the dishes. And she would always try to stop him. And, oh, no, you cooked this wonderful dinner. You just sit down and relax. I can't even say I follow that example. My wife is there. But actually, my wife told me she doesn't want me doing dishes because I don't do it right. Some would suggest I might have sabotaged the effort. But I actually sincerely tried a few times, because that's the thing you're supposed to do, but that's not what she wants me to do. There are a lot of other things she does want me to do. But the principle was there in terms of example. Seeing the fruit of the Spirit, seeing them live out the wisdom, sometimes that may not be in the parents. And there are different, I'll talk about different types of situations. There may be situations where the parents are following the Lord and you're just reinforcing that. There may also be situations where the parents are fighting, the parents are in conflict, the parents are divorced. And maybe even the parents don't want you reading the Bible to your grandchildren and you're in an awkward spot. But your grandchildren are watching you. They're watching how you treat each other. They're watching your speech. And if they can see sweethearts for a lifetime, if they can see something different, that can have a powerful impact as well. And then praying for them. Actually, when I did my research for this talk, there was one entire book about how to pray for your grandchildren. It had prayers for them at different times of their lives to realize that they are in the world. I mean, I've often given thanks to God that I was not a teenager when there was an internet. And as you see the corruption of the world growing, and we should be praying for our grandchildren that the Lord would protect them from the world. And maybe their parents aren't praying for them as much as they should be. And to pray specifically, to ask the parents, how can we pray for our grandchildren? To ask the grandchildren as they get older, how can we pray for you? And that also could be a revealing conversation. That could be, I guess, in counseling terms, of some data gathering method in terms of what are the burdens of your heart? What are your concerns? What are your hopes? What are your fears? You pray for their conversion. You pray for their future spouse. And then communication and connection. Something wonderful is that almost all grandchildren crave a connection with their grandparents. And you have this great opportunity for influence if you just make the time and to be available to them. They care what you think. They care about your opinion. They're listening. You share family stories and legacy. Something interesting, my wife's mother is named Lois, like Timothy, in 2 Timothy. And Lois made for each of her grandchildren this last Christmas kind of family legacy book, which tells the story of the family going as far back, and pictures and stories and all kinds of detail that she and her husband wrote out, their grandfather, our children's grandfather. When I was even high school and college, my grandfather and I would exchange letters, and his would usually be longer than mine. And there's in a box somewhere in North Carolina that I haven't yet unpacked from my move, but my mother has actually found some of that and reads it, and it's just something wonderful and amazing looking back. Now, many of us are separated geographically. I mean, in our case, we live in North Carolina, and we have one grandchild in San Diego, which is about 2,600 miles to the west. We have another grandchild in Seattle, which will probably be about 3,000 miles to the northwest. Our third child doesn't have anybody yet, but he lives in Australia. So we're not able to have Sunday lunch all together. But we have technology. That's where the internet can be a good thing. And so you've got Skype and FaceTime and making those efforts. And where we actually was it FaceTiming or something, and watching our granddaughter Baltimore taking her first few steps live, making those efforts. And so a lot of actually this is a motivation for some older people to become tech savvy, that you've been avoiding these things. And actually I encouraged my mom to join Facebook. I don't know what you think of that, but so much stuff gets put up there by about the grandchildren and their lives. That's just how th're accustomed to circulating information. My mom hasn't gone for that yet, however. Great-grandmothers is another topic. Another thing would just be showing up for life events. And I'll confess for myself, probably the time is my most valuable commodity in life, even more than money. It's what I tend to run out of the most. And yet it's time invested in relationship that can have such an impact. And I look back again where like I was in band and did some sports, and my grandparents would drive halfway across the state of Texas to go sit and watch like a baseball game where I only get up 2 times, or a concert where I'm one of 100 people on the stage. But it meant a lot to me as a child, more to me now. So being there for those things, which may be setting aside some of your other things in life and going to ballet. I mean, now we've got like Alexandra, the 9-year-old, is all into ballet. And so I've never been I had boys, so this ballet thing is a new thing for me. And it wouldn't be my choice of how to spend a whole day watching 9-year-olds jump up and down and twirl around, but what it means to her in the relationship, showing kindness, gifts. Little children get really excited to get mail. Caroline's actually a Sunday school teacher, has been for 30 years, and she'll send cards to her children. And with email and technology, not many people get letters anymore, right? And so to send a card or to send a letter or to send a small gift. When I was at university, my grandmother knew I liked oatmeal raisin cookies, and she would send me a box of oatmeal raisin cookies. And I never told her, but by the time the U.S. Postal Service got done with them, they were usually a box of oatmeal raisin crumbs. And even then, I was a business major. I'm thinking, she could have sent me $1 and I could have gone to the store and bought more cookies than in this box it cost her $3 to mail that was a box of crumbs. But I wouldn't have remembered the $1, but I remember the crumbs, the cookies. And just, she loved me so much that just the problem of wrapping that thing up, taking it to the post office, paying the postage and all of that, it doesn't have to be something that costs a lot of money. It's physical affection and hugs. And 1 Corinthians 1, I'll explain why in a minute, that to affirm our grandchildren, in the United States, we have bumper stickers that people have, and they'll say, my daughter or my granddaughter was a star citizen at Podunk Elementary School or something, or my child made the honor roll, and you put the bumper sticker on, or you have a badge to wear or something to boast in the accomplishments of your children or your grandchildren. Well, not all grandchildren are intelligent, good-looking, and successful, are they? And a wonderful thing about grandparents should be that we love them as God has loved us. And that's why I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26. For consider your calling, brethren, there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things that are strong. The base things and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so he may nullify the things that are, that no man may boast before God. God doesn't love us because we were the most intelligent, attractive, godly, wonderful people. He loves us in spite of that. It's a love of choice, a sovereign grace love. And that's how we reflect our love to our grandchildren. Yes, some grandchildren get in trouble a lot. Actually, I spent the first 4 years of my elementary school career in the principal's office virtually. My grandparents still love me. Maybe my parents didn't tell them all that, I'm not sure. But to love them because they're yours, not to love them merely based upon their achievements and their accomplishments. And even as they get older, some grandchildren get caught up in drunkenness and drugs and immorality. We're grieved over that, but that doesn't make us stop loving them. And sometimes when they will no longer listen to their parents, they might still listen to you. They might still care about what you think. I've even known of situations where young adults get in trouble or teenagers get in trouble, and the grandparents are able to step in and help and be a place of rescue. We actually had a situation, it relates to the abuse talks I've given, where in a family, the older brother sexually mistreated a younger sister. And part of the counsel we gave the family, in addition to reporting it, is you need to get them apart. He can't stay in the home. And so immediately, they had grandparents in the area, and the grandparents were willing to take that young man in, where there was nobody around he could harm. And that's probably why the young man didn't go immediately to jail. And so he was able to be with family. Now, I remember the parents, I'm taking it from the other side, the parents were saying, well, they're not reformed like we are, and their church has like women leaders and things. Be thankful to God that they're willing. Do you realize what they're taking on? They thought they had retired and life was going to be easy, and now they got a 14-year-old in the house. You should be so thankful. But they're going to take him to a church where there's a women pastor. Yeah, I don't like that either. But just be so thankful that they're there for you to what else would you have done? They love you. They love him. And they've been a big part of the solution. And now it's been many months later that there's a program of counseling that young man and working with the family that's kept him from having to go into prison. And the grandparents have been a big part of that. But immense sacrifice they've had to make. Now, again, I confess, I like the empty nest life that we've had for a while. I like the freedom we have for ministry and travel and everything else. And if suddenly I had a 14-year-old that I had to take care of, tying me to everything, that would be difficult. But sometimes we have opportunity to express sacrificial love and to be a help in that way. Another would be affirmation. A book I would commend to you is not as well known as many of the books, counseling books, but it's called Practicing Affirmation by Sam Crabtree. Sam Crabtree is the executive pastor at Bethlehem Baptist in Minneapolis, where John Piper was a pastor for so many years. And the point of his book is that it is biblical to affirm the good work of God in others. And I think sometimes as Calvinists who believe in total depravity, we're a bit afraid to praise people lest we puff up their ego and deny their sin or something. And he does a great job of proving biblically that it's right to commend that which is commendable. You look at the letters of Paul, and even in 1 Corinthians, he finds something to commend about the Corinthians, and that was one messed up church. But he found something. He was like, and I actually think of it as being an affirmation detector. In the sense you're looking for that which can be affirmed. It's easy to find things to criticize because everybody is a sinner. But you're looking for that which can be not to flatter somebody, but that which can be legitimately affirmed. In the Revelation letters in chapters 2 and 3, when Jesus writes to the 7 churches, most of them have an element of affirmation, even when there's a rebuke coming. Proverbs 31, the husband rises up and blesses his wife, and many women have done well, but you excel them all. So to affirm the good work of God in others is a good thing. And again, sometimes parents are so caught up in criticizing and correcting, and they always see what is wrong. And we're not denying what's wrong. But it's good to affirm that which is affirmable. And even in the case of an unbelieving child, because there's such a thing as common grace. And it's still the restraining grace of God if a child is hardworking, honest, diligent, and those things can be affirmed as well. Something we were learning with our children as we learned about these things and grew, that a child who is diligent in their music or who is faithful in their work or is saving money or working hard in school, even if they're not doing that right now for the glory of God, these are still in common grace affirmable qualities. And so to affirm what can be affirmed, and then sometimes to correct gently what needs to be corrected as well, to have a voice there. Another way that grandparents can bless grandchildren is Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Now, grandparents are a bit notorious for spoiling their grandchildren. We're going to get into that in a minute in terms of some dangers there. But I think small gifts even, a little thing. And one thing that's exciting is a 5-year-old can be thrilled with a girl with a little bitty doll or a piece of candy or a little toy truck for a boy. And so sometimes it can be more substantial in that some of us realize, again, as Carolyn and I are now 60, 61, one of us, that's a hint, that we realize that the generation behind us is struggling financially. It's hard for them to do for their kids what maybe even wasn't as difficult in the previous generation. And sometimes it's the grandparents who can help pay for Christian school or help pay for homeschooling or can contribute to help that family, help in a down payment on a house. And you're not throwing money at irresponsible families, but sometimes they're doing the best they can, and God has given you the resources where rather than waiting till you're dead in 20 or 30 years, when they may not need the money, to be a blessing now. When Caroline graduated with her master's degree from RTS Charlotte, I was blessed in that she got a degree worth tens of thousands of dollars for very little because as a faculty wife, she could take classes for free. So I gave her a big gift, which was an annual pass to Disney World. And since she didn't want to go alone, I got one for myself as well. And so we've been to, actually it's about to expire. We're going to go for our 40th anniversary soon, kind of as it's about to expire. But one thing I've noticed when we go to Disney World, that there are all these family groups where you have the parents with the little kids, and the parents and little kids are kind of enjoying the ride. And then you got the grandparents who are our age and older who are kind of standing there watching. Or maybe they're taking care of the baby while the others are out there playing. And I figured out pretty fast is the way these young families are able to go to Disney World with these exorbitant prices is because of generous grandparents who are choosing to bring that blessing. And some of you may say, well, why don't you support missions or something? I'm not going to get into that discussion. But I think there are good things. We have when Caroline's father purposed to send each grandchild and now each great-grandchild to Christian camp, where he's been involved as a way of showing blessing and generosity. Grandparents can also help the parents of their grandchildren in various ways. One is counsel. Yesterday when we talked about parenting is more than a formula, a couple of people came up to me and kind of echoed what I was saying, is that parenting seemed really easy before we had kids. With their parents, the grandparents of their kids, learning, seeing it through their eyes, and even also remembering like Colossians 3 says, fathers, do not exasperate your children that they might not lose heart. And there are bad things that can happen. One would be some grandparents are a bad influence. You look at the generational failures in the kings of Israel, and you had wicked kings who were bad influences on multiple generations following them, who failed to set the example they should have set, who failed to live well. 2 Kings 17:41, for while these nations feared the Lord, they also served their idols, their children likewise, and their grandchildren as their fathers did, so to this day. That's describing in Israel when you had this kind of mixed religion, and what the fathers did, the children, the grandchildren did, which was wrong and evil. So an important aspect of being a grandparent, this is where we've actually faced challenges. I'll speak very personally that because our children are not believers and they're seeking to raise their children as seems best to them, there are areas of conflict. I'll tell you a couple things that have happened to us. One of them is that one of our sons found some scientific psychological research that shows spanking is always bad. Some psychologists have said spanking never works. It always damages kids. And so he's sending us these articles as they're just having their first child. And I will, and we've interacted with them about it, and it's been a pleasant interaction, thanks be to God. And I would say part of my response would be probably the psychologists who have studied spanking have never seen it done right. Most people hit their kids when they're mad, and they do it as an act of revenge, rather than waiting until they've calmed down and doing it as a loving act of correction in a measured way. And so what's been studied, a lot of people too, a lot of parents, secular parents even, they determine they don't want to spank their kids, and finally the kid makes them so mad, they smack them. That's not the way that God is designed. But then the message is also, we're not going to spank our kids, and you're not going to spank our kids. And so because God has placed them in authority over their own children, we have to respect their rules and not undermine those rules, even though we don't agree. And that can be very challenging. And so you have to realize that you don't have authority over your grandchildren. A lot of grandparents get in trouble because they undermine the parents. And I even know of situations where parents are so put out with the grandparents that they're saying, well, we can't let you watch our kids alone because you don't follow our rules. And what can be hard as a Christian said, but I want to read Bible stories. I want to take them to VBS. I want to bring them to church. And when your children say, I really don't want you proselytizing my kids, you have to find a way to respect that rather than undermining it, as difficult as that may be. So I think it's important you make it clear to your children that you will honor their standards and wishes when it comes to dealing with your grandkids. That may be difficult. So we don't want to undermine their authority. And I actually have a video. Are we able to play the video? It's meant to be a bit funny.
Let's cut to the chase. Mom, where were you the night of August 24th?
You sent Annabeth over to my house for the night.
Exactly. So explain this.
There's a Snickers and a Reese cup. She loves those.
It's sugar. And according to section 14-2 of Mom's rulebook, there's a strict ban on sugar in this house.
But sweetie, we weren't at your house.
So you want to play a rag game? All right, Mom. Tell me, what was my bedtime when I was Annabeth's age?
I know. That's why I bought it. Now, if you'll please excuse me, I've promised Annabeth to go get ice cream. Annabeth! Sweetie, it's time for ice cream!
I actually remember when my children were very small, probably around, whatever, 1980, 89, 90, whatever, the original Nintendo came out, this little box game, the most simple video game you could imagine compared to what is now. And it was one of those toys in America that there was a limited production and people were standing in line at Toys R Us hoping to get one. My mother snagged one for my kids. You know, probably there at midnight after standing in a long line or something when the truck unloaded. And I told her, no, my kids can't have that. I've had to seek her forgiveness for that. I mean, a year later I let them have it, but she did a good job of respecting that. So we want to be careful not to criticize the parents, not to undermine their authority. Caroline has had a pretty difficult counseling case recently, again, of a grandma who is very, very unhappy with how her son and daughter-in-law are raising the grandchildren. And this grandma is one who expresses herself very strongly. And the result has been increasing alienation. She's not doing anything to make things better. It's not working. And there's a statement actually I make in the book about parenting adult kids, and that is that if your adult children already know what you think about something, repetition will not make you more effective. And before you open your mouth, it's a question to ask yourself is, do my children already know what I think about this? The problem is not ignorance. The problem is rejection of what you believe. And the nagging is just going to make it worse. And so I think when things are difficult, we need to be very careful to back off. And I've seen situations, and again, you're looking at it from both sides. I've had the parents of the grandchildren say, what do I do? When my parents take care of the child, and the video was funny, but they're letting them watch an R-rated movie that has language or content in it that is completely unacceptable for my 11-year-old. And there's a point that the parent may have to say to the grandparent, if you will not follow these rules, then we can't let you have the children without us being there, which is going to limit things. We've even known of situations where so bad where you had a very angry grandfather who was very disrespectful sometimes of the grandchildren, but even especially of his son's wife, in front of everybody, that there was estrangement to where there was extremely limited contact for a period of time. And so there can be times when it's so bad that the parents of the children choose to restrict. And there are other situations where the other way around, where they're, the parents, you're the grandparents, and maybe it's just they've rejected your faith, and they're angry they're angry that you spanked them, and they're fearful you're going to be a bad influence on their children whom they're trying to raise as non-Christians or whatever. There's some very difficult and sad situations take place. I've known more than one family where even they've been completely cut off from their grandchildren. Romans 12:18 says, as far as is possible with you, to be at peace with all men. And, in these situations, one would be kind of biblical peacemaking summarized, where are there logs in your eye that you need to get out? Are there ways you've been angry, disrespectful, unwise, where you need to seek forgiveness of your children who are restricting you? But it also may be in their own sin, there's nothing else you can do. Romans 12:18 is comforting in that as far as is possible with you, that sometimes you could be doing now everything possible, and if in their hardness of heart they won't reconcile, there is nothing else you can do. And it's heartbreaking, but I know of these cases of ongoing estrangement. Now, we want to avoid that on the front end by being careful, being respectful, and praying much. A few other principles, not showing favoritism. It kind of gets back to what I did in 1 Corinthians 1, is that some grandchildren will be more attractive, more intelligent, more personable, more funny than others. And making the effort, one of the bad things that I saw happen is one of my grandparents clearly had favorites, and the other grandchildren felt badly. I won't say who the favorite was, but it came out explicitly a couple times, and it was very embarrassing. And the Joseph and his brothers and the jealousy and all of that. When we love as God has loved us, we love them because they're our grandchildren, not because of their merit. There can also sometimes be conflict with the other set of in-laws and competitions and jealousies. What do you mean you're going to spend Christmas with them again this year? And there just has to be a lot of grace, patience, turning the other cheek. And then another issue would be just sometimes there can be selfishness. There can be selfish parents who take too much advantage of the grandparents, either financially or even babysitting otherwise. But there's, again, I know my culture, there's kind of this mentality now in America that you turn 60 or 65 and you then spend the rest of your years being as selfish as you want to be. Playing golf, traveling, just living the good life, just lounging by the pool. If you ever want to see the opposite of that, look in the back corner of this room with the Max, where he's retired twice just to go work harder and is still in his mid-80s. Together they're pressing on and involved in their grandchildren's lives as well. But I think old age is not a time merely for rest, nor is it merely a time for selfishness. It's a time to serve God as best we can, and that can be making some sacrifices to help our children and our grandchildren. Again, my most valuable commodity is time, and to be willing to help where we can, not undermining the rest of your life in ministry, but that's an important consideration. Some grandparents experience exceptional challenges in terms of sin and unbelief. And we've already read in Luke 12 how there'll be Jesus and our loyalty to Christ and the gospel will divide families, father against mother and all these, father against son and daughter against daughter-in-law, all these different things. It happened throughout biblical history. You're going to face, some of you have adult children who aren't believers. Some of you have grandchildren who have rebelled against God and their parents. And then some of you are going to experience rejection that as Jesus was rejected by his own people, and he warned that the world will hate us, some of us will have challenges there that can be very significant. J.C. Ryle writes, "Few believers can look around the circle of their relatives and acquaintances and not see striking illustrations of the truth of the Lord's prophecy. Melancholy as it seems, it is a fact that nothing annoys some persons so much as the conversion of their relatives. Let us never be moved by those who charge the gospel with being the cause of strife and divisions upon the earth. It is not the gospel which is to blame, but the corrupt heart of men. So long as some men and women will not repent and believe, there will be division. To be surprised at it is the height of folly. The very existence of division is one proof of Christ's foresight of the truth of Christianity." And there may be times when you'll be pushed or even forced to choose between your loyalty to Christ and your family. And it actually relates some to the homosexual, transsexual issue that we've talked about in previous sessions, where your granddaughter says she's in love with another woman, and now they say they're going to get married, and they want you to come. What are you going to do? That your grandson decides that he's a woman in a man's body, and he wants to transition to become your granddaughter, and he wants you to acknowledge that and appreciate that. And there's a very fine line. I will say that the right thing to say is no matter what you choose, no matter what you do, nothing will stop us from loving you. I would even add that you can try to have a relationship with them as far as possible in terms of we're willing to spend time with you. I would even be willing to spend time with you and whoever is in your life that you care about. But there are some lines I cannot cross. Jesus said you must hate father and mother, and I think that the principle would be that you must choose him above them when the choice is forced upon you. And just, as an example for me, and this is something where, I myself could not in good conscience go to a same-sex wedding because I feel like the whole event is a revolt against what God has designed marriage to be. Guests at a wedding are witnesses who are supposed to affirm and enforce the covenant being made, and I cannot in good conscience participate in that. And I have not yet been put in exactly this situation, but you might be put in a situation where they would say, if you want to continue to have a relationship with me, you need to come. And you need to call this person my wife or husband or whatever, and you have to accept the relationship. And I can say, I can love you, I can love your friend, I can spend time with you, I can invite you over for dinner, I can do many things, but there's some things I cannot do. And it may cost some people. It's not always easy. And it's interesting, in Deuteronomy 13, if you want to talk about a hard choice, beginning in verse 6, if your brother, your mother's son or your daughter, or the wife you cherish, or your friend who is your own soul, entice you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, whom neither you nor your fathers have known, of the gods of the peoples who are around you, near you or far from you, from one end of the earth to the other end, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, and your eye shall not pity him, nor shall you spare or conceal him, but you shall surely kill him. Your hand shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. Now, I'm thankful I'm not under the Old Covenant, where I'm dealing with that exact situation, but here's the principle. If you're in a situation and it was your son, your daughter, even your spouse under the Old Covenant, and they said, let us go worship Baal, let us go worship the gods of the Canaanites, it's a test of your loyalty, whether you're going to be loyal to God and to his law first, or whether you're going to compromise your values to get along with your family members. And under the Old Covenant, if there were people obeying that law, they would have had to say, I'm going to turn in my own child for promoting Baal worship, even though he will die. Would you have been willing to do that? Well, what we're being asked to do isn't nearly that difficult, is it? But it's similar. In that if your child says, if you want to have a relationship with me, you must embrace a worldview contrary to the Bible. You must call something marriage that is not marriage. You must call something female that is male. You have a choice to make. And some Christians making the choice of saying, I must obey God rather than men. I'm not going to commit the sin of Eli, honoring my sons above God. And for some of us, it's going to cost us. And we have to be willing to do that. Our love for family cannot surpass our love for Christ. He must come first, even before our families. Now again, I'm saying as far as possible, be at peace. Love them. Tell them you love them. Have a relationship with them. But there are going to be situations where this will come into play. I've already referenced it, Luke 14:26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yea, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And as our culture becomes more and more post-Christian and anti-Christian and anti-family, this is going to be more difficult for us. And actually, where we're experiencing it is we don't have children who are homosexual, but we have children who have embraced the values of the world, and they would still look upon us as bigots for not embracing those values. And it's created moderate pressure on us. For some people, the pressure is extreme. And ironically, is unbelieving family members can be intolerant and judgmental. They have a different morality, but they believe their morality every bit as much as we believe the Ten Commandments, and we're in violation of their commandments. And that makes us bad and subject to judgment. But even if they reject you, do whatever you can to show that you love them. So, as we're wrapping up, I guess I'll mention one other situation that sometimes occurs. And that is a situation that we've seen in our church, and you may see here. Sometimes grandparents actually wind up taking on the parenting role. And we had a situation where you had a young couple, got married, had a child, they divorced, and the mom just went off to be herself, and the husband went off into his career, and the grandparents wind up being the only people who want to raise their granddaughter. And there are statistics in the United States of hundreds of thousands of families where this is happening. And then if you add in there are other situations where for economic reasons, the woman has been abandoned and she moves back in with her parents with her kids. So many grandparents find themselves in that situation long term. And again, I think it's in a fallen world, it's a consequence of sin all around us, but it's also an opportunity it would be hard for me at my age to start over raising kids or even to jump in the middle. But it's sometimes what God will call us to do. We want to do it faithfully. A piece of advice I would give is that if the parents are unwilling to parent their own children, you need the legal rights of a parent to continue the job. The sad situation that happened with us is that the grandparents raised this girl from like 3 to 14, and then the mom jumps back and says, okay, I want her back now, after virtually completely neglecting her for 11 years. And so my advice would be, if they're unwilling, if they're giving you parental responsibility, then you need parental authority and legal guardianship in the long term. Otherwise, getting passed back and forth is going to be a mess. But there can be opportunity there, and that can be a good thing. So, I began with the positive. The latter part were the struggles that, as much as we would love to think of grandparenting as in this idealistic way, that for some it's going to be hard. It's not for all. Even then, there can be blessing. It's a good thing that old age can be a time of fruitfulness. Some of that fruitfulness can continue to be in our families. I appreciate that the scriptures teach that there is honor in old age. There's also the faithfulness of God. That, Isaiah 46:4, even to your old age I will be the same. Even to your graying years I will bear you. I have done it. I will carry you. I will bear you and I will deliver you. In Psalm 92. The righteous man will flourish like the palm tree. He will grow like a cedar in Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still yield fruit in old age. They shall be full of sap and very green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock. There is no unrighteousness in him. Again, I can't help but to look at the back corner of the room when I read that passage. So, old age can be a time of blessing. Many of us will enjoy a lot of blessing with our families. Some of us, even we suffer grief. We have even their hope that God has given us a family among his people. Jesus said to Peter, we've left families to follow you. And he says, no matter what you've given him in this life, you'll have far more in my kingdom. And we're blessed, some of us who have very difficult family situations, to have this family of the people of God, and sometimes even grandparents within the church. And those kinds of relationships can be very sweet and very precious. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you for your word, that it does speak authoritatively, infallibly, wisely to every situation in life. Help my brothers and sisters here who are struggling in difficult situations to put their hope in you, to be an influence for good for their children and their grandchildren. We thank you for the blessings many of us enjoy of good relationships and opportunity for influence. Help us to live not for ourselves but for your glory, and then to love others sacrificially as Christ has loved us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.